Well, hey, you guys. We're doing another Tomes of Terror at long last. This is my book review series, if you're new here. So, as with most things that happen in regards to my book reviews and my movie reviews, too, to a lesser extent, the way I ended up actually reading and discussing these two particular books, because we're doing two today, this was completely random how this happened. So both books actually popped up in my Kindle Unlimited recommendations, and both caught my eye for various reasons. I'm not really sure why the first one did. Maybe it was the title or the cover or something like that, but it was just kind of sounded good, so that I just kind of went with it. I had never read anything by either author before, I mean, at least that I remember, and I actually didn't realize before kind of diving into them that they were both novellas. So I figured that I would combine them both into one review because, like I said, I started reading the first one and I was like, oh my God, this is super short. And I read it like in like a lunch hour and a half, you know what I mean? And then I was like, well, shit, I might as well like pick another one, you know what I mean? And I picked another one and then that was a novella too. And I was just like, fuck it, I'm just going to put them both in one review because they were both like really short. And the thing about it too, interestingly, was not only were they both under 100 pages, but they also kind of shared a very vaguely similar theme of a man kind of looking for love, you know what I mean? And having things go horribly, horribly wrong. The approach of the stories was pretty different, but both of the stories in the broad outlines were kind of about that. So I was like, well, they're kind of similar in that regard. So that's another reason that I kind of put them together. Now, I will say that both of these books are what I would classify as somewhat extreme horror. I mean, they're not the worst thing I've ever read, like not by a long stretch, so they're not like the sickest of the sick or anything like that. The first one is kind of more on the over-the-top gory side, while the second one is more on the like snot, shit, and vomit end of things. But I'm gonna say that like if extreme horror isn't your bag, then neither one of these books is gonna be for you. So I'm warning you right now. Like I said, they're not all that bad, but you know, I've read like stuff that was like way worse. But if you're not into it, then you know it's gonna be like rough going. That's all I'm saying. So the first novella was about 97 pages, at least the Kindle Unlimited version was, and it was published in 2022. And it's called The Funhouse by Matt Shaw. Now he's actually a British author and cartoonist. Now, this book, the bulk of the action takes place right around Halloween, so I feel like this would be a good, quick read, you know, around the Halloween season. I'm gonna say that even though I liked the story kind of well enough when I was reading it, I noticed that it didn't really stick with me all that much after I finished it, because I actually like read it, and then it was a while before I actually got around to doing this review, because I actually read another novella in the meantime that I'm also going to talk about. So a lot of details from it didn't really stick with me, so I had to kind of go back and like refresh my memory and stuff like that. So I'm just saying that. So the story is told from the point of view of a guy named Jim, who basically just seems like your regular run-of-the-mill garden variety average English bloke who doesn't really have all that many distinguishing characteristics. I couldn't tell you if he was described what he looked like or any of his personality traits or anything like that. He just seemed like a dude, you know what I mean? Just like a stand-in. So he's out on the dating scene, and at the very beginning of the story, he's on a first date with a woman named Laura, who he met online. Now, because her dating profile seemed to suggest that she might have enjoyed the finer things in life, let's put it that way, Jim has decided that he's going to try and kind of like impress her by booking a reservation at this kind of swanky restaurant that he can't really afford. Now, in spite of the hefty price tag, like when the bill comes, he's like, oh, you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. But in spite of that, though, like the date goes shockingly well. And Jim even finds out that Laura is actually kind of, you know, a somebody, like sort of not famous, but you know, she's kind of like well known. She, like the staff at the fancy restaurant, like all know her and stuff. So it turns out that even though she didn't really divulge this because she didn't want it to be a thing, I guess, she comes from like a really wealthy, very prominent family in town. So Jim is pretty jazzed about this. Like he can't really believe his luck. And better still, Laura seems really into him, like very obviously. And this all seems entirely too good to be true. Well, surprise, surprise. That actually does turn out to be the case. This is a horror story after all. And I'm going to say too that even in real life, like if you meet a girl, she's like super into you on the first date, maybe like just proceed with caution is all I'm saying. So Jim and Laura's relationship, like over the course of the short story, kind of proceeds at a very fast, like whirlwind pace, and everything is just as completely perfect as can be. And after only a very little while, I can't remember exactly how long it was, but it wasn't that long a time, Jim buys a ring and decides to propose to her. And he even decides to, to do the whole like proper old fashioned thing, which I don't even think anybody does anymore. But he's going to go through the whole rigmarole of asking Laura's father, who's kind of like this big muckety muck, like a business owner or something. He's going to go to him and like formally ask for her hand in marriage and shit like that. So, it's kind of like hardcore if he's willing to do that. So Jim is kind of like anxious when he goes to have this meeting with her dad, but Laura's dad is like all about it. Like he thinks it's a great idea. And he even gives Jim a little tip. He says, if you're going to propose to my daughter, why don't you propose to her on Halloween? Because that is her very, very favorite holiday. Mine too. And she would absolutely love it if you did that. Now, Laura, as it happens, has already invited Jim to this big, like, block party type Halloween party that her family has, like, every year. So he figures, oh, that's the perfect time. Like, I can, ask her to marry me there. So they go to the party, and it's super packed, and, like, everybody seems, like, really, really friendly. Little bit weird, though, little detail, is that there's all these really big, nice houses in the neighborhood, because like I said, this is kind of like a wealthy area. And then there's this one sort of like dilapidated, abandoned house that's there for some unexplained reason. Now, shortly after this, like, not too long into the party, Jim starts to feel a little bit woozy. So, kind of where this shit is gonna go. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not gonna spoil what happens. You can probably imagine like what happens from there. So, as I said, this was a perfectly entertaining, just bloody little slice of Halloween nastiness. It had something, I will go this far, it does have something of sort of like a game style horror element, like maybe like something like Ready or Not or Would You Rather or something like, not exactly like that, but similar. So if you like that, you might like this kind of thing too, like, just along those lines. But I'm going to say that because it's so short, like I said, it's only 97 pages, you don't really get to know the characters well enough to get like entirely invested in the situation. And there isn't really, there's not really the space to have a great deal of history or context to explain exactly how these circumstances that Jim finds himself in, like how they ended up coming about, you know what I mean? And like just the backstory of it. I actually think the Funhouse might have worked better, like as a longer piece, as a, novel length, because it would have had more space for character development and more world building. And, this is a cool concept overall. I mean, it's not super, super original. Like I've read similar things before, but it is like a cool idea. And I think it could have used more detail. Like I wanted to know more about, how did this come about? Like why do they do this crazy shit? You know what I mean? So it came across to me like more like a teaser for a longer work than kind of like a complete self-contained story, if that makes any sense. So yeah, the next book on the agenda. This book actually materialized in my recommendations on Kindle Unlimited after I finished The Funhouse. And the thing that struck me about this one was the weird ass cover. Like I love the cover of this. It's like, it's kind of unsettling. Like I've seen other covers similar to this, and I'm wondering if it's like the same artist. I forgot to like look who the artist was, but I've seen like similar artwork on other ones, but I really do like it. So this book is called 100% Match, and it's by Patrick C. Harrison III. This book was also published in 2022, and it's also under 100 pages. I think it was only about 96 pages, something like that. Now, I actually, like, after I read it, I went and looked to Goodreads and, like, looked on some of the reviews and stuff. And I had to laugh because the author himself wrote the first review of his book. So he gave his own book 1 star, and the entirety of the review was, "This book is disgusting. The author should stick a fork in a socket." And I was like, I do love a writer with a good sense of humor. So I really did think that was very, very funny when I saw that. So, as I mentioned, this novella is also more on the extreme end of the horror genre. not so much gore and like limb evisceration and beheading and stuff like that as it was in the Funhouse. This is kind of more low-key gross scenarios involving, for example, shitting in chili and making people eat it, like funneling vomit down someone's throat, like that kind of thing, you know what I mean? And to me, like, which if you've been around here a while, like, you know that I talk about this a lot, that type of extreme horror is way more revolting to me than the over-the-top gory kind. Like, the over-the-top gory kind, I can handle pretty much anything, but the second you start talking about, like, piss and shit and vomit, I'm just like, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna say 100% match did totally trigger my gag reflex a couple times, not gonna lie about that. So just as in the Funhouse, the first book that I talked about, 100% match is told from the point of view of a young man who is looking for love. He's out on the make, you know what I mean? He's looking for the love of a compatible woman. So our protagonist this time around is named Bartholomew Bartley, or he's usually just called Bart for short. He's just this overweight, balding fast food worker, like he works at a burger joint, and he lives alone after the death of his elderly mother. Like, his mom died and like left him the house, so he has a place to live. And he's actually thinking of going back to school for his teaching certificate, which, as you get into the story and learn the character, that becomes even more horrifying, you know what I mean? So Bart is obsessed with statistics, particularly in regards to dating. Like, for example, like the very first line of the book is, 0.001752% of relationships end in homicide, which is that's a great opening line, I have to say. So he also, like, as it goes on, he throws out more statistics. He's like 69% of women prefer a dad bod to like a ripped dude. 98.3% of women don't like being called fat. 93% of Asian American women are married before they turn 40. Like, all that kind of stuff. Like, every few paragraphs, he's always like, giving like statistics like that. So Bart is also something of a quirky individual. Let's call him that. His hobbies include throwing cats into the street, which, that was very upsetting. There's animal cruelty in this as well. So, I mean, this trigger warnings. There's lots of trigger warnings in this. He drinks his own urine with a tea bag in it, so that's pretty special. Often jerks off into the mayonnaise at work, and, that's the mayonnaise that he puts on everybody's burgers. And also sticks his finger up his butt to help himself fall asleep. So there's that too. Also, just as an aside, he also has absolutely no qualms about casually murdering somebody if the situation arises. And the situation does arise, like, quite frequently, over the course of this very short story. So everything he does is conveyed in this very unadorned, like, matter-of-fact prose, which kind of makes the whole thing seem that much more disquieting, I guess, because you just know, I mean, there really are freaks like this, like, out running around loose in the world, and this is exactly what I picture their day-to-day experience being like. Like, to them, it would all seem, everything they're doing would seem like really mundane, even though they're obviously doing like really horribly depraved shit, like in between doing all the regular people shit, like, going to the grocery store or the laundromat or whatever, and it's like, oh, and then by the way, I'm also like killing an animal and like putting its legs in my freezer. You know what I mean? It's like, it's that kind of shit. And there's really people like that. So I'm just like, that's exactly what I picture, like, a dude like that being like, you know what I mean? So we get to spend some time with Bart, just establishing his habits and his lifestyle, if you want to call it that. And then about a third of the way into the story, about 30 pages in, something like that, Bart meets this very attractive young woman, seemingly quite by accident. She actually drops her wallet, I think, in the grocery store parking lot, and he catches up to her to return it. And she is so appreciative of his kindness that she later actually like tracks him down at the restaurant where he works and basically just like straight up asks him out. So it turns out that her name is Sarah, and Bart is just immediately completely smitten with her. She seems completely ideal in every way. She's like exactly what Bart has always been looking for his whole entire life, like all his statistics, just in human form, you know what I mean? She's very, very charming. She's very genuine. She's very down to earth. And she seems like very interested in Bart's life, like his background, his family background, his future plans, all that kind of stuff. She tells him that she makes instructional videos for a living. And so after they have like their very first coffee date, you know, they go and get coffee, which goes very, very well and very successful. She actually like asks him for his phone number and clearly wants to see him again. And she's basically like, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? You know what I mean? So again, like the eagerness with the women, that should be a red flag right there. But, you know, obviously the dudes in this are like not the sharpest tools in the shed in that regard. So as I mentioned before, in regards to the Funhouse, you know, this whole situation obviously is suspiciously perfect, like everything going really well. And before too long, the reader finds out exactly what Sarah's deal is, because you know that she does have a deal. You know what I mean? I will admit that I pretty much saw the ending coming. Like, not exactly, but I got it pretty close. You know what I mean? You probably will too if you're paying attention to the story. But I'm gonna say that that didn't really hamper my enjoyment. I'm not really sure if enjoyment is the right word, considering all the disgusting shit that happens in this book. But it didn't really hamper my enjoyment of it, is what I'm going to say. So again, it's pretty fucking gross. I'm going to say this is a pretty fucking gross book. And Bart, in particular, the main protagonist, is just a vile main character. But all that said, like, he's still, like, strangely compelling. I don't think that main characters necessarily have to be likable. They just have to be interesting. And he's definitely interesting, but like I said, he's vile. He's just, like, a vile human being. So how you feel about that is gonna, you know, affect, obviously, how you react to the novella. Now, of the two books that I read, this one actually made a lot more of a visceral impression and a lot larger emotional impact, I guess, because we're mostly, like, inside Bart's head almost all the time. So he was like a character, you can't really relate to him because, like I said, he's kind of a monster, but you know, you at least like know what his thought processes are and stuff like that. So you can kind of connect with him in that regard. So I think I liked this one a lot better than the first one, but I mean, I liked them both just fine. I don't really want to shit on the first one, but I'm just saying that this one made a lot more of an impact. Like, I still remembered a lot more about it just because it was way grosser. It was just way more, unsettling. Just the whole vibe of it was just like so nasty. It's just made you kind of want to take a shower afterwards. So it basically made a lot more of an impression. So, you know, so as of this recording, which is May 2023, these are both available to read for free on Kindle Unlimited if you have a membership to that. So, you know, if you're into extreme horror and are kind of looking for, or want to get into extreme horror and are looking for a couple short examples of it to kind of like, you know, dip your toe in or whatever, then these two are like pretty good to do that with. Like I said, the Funhouse is more like gory, you know what I mean? Whereas the second one is more like just gross, like putting gross shit in people's food and, you know, cruelty to animals and, you know, vomiting and shit and stuff like that. So, you know, depending on what one you want. I'm going to recommend, though, that if you're going to read the Funhouse, I would save it for Halloween, because it is the whole thing isn't set at Halloween, but like the big, you know, climax and stuff like that is set at Halloween. So I think that would be like a good, it's weird because the front of it doesn't really suggest that it's like a Halloween story, but it kind of is. In fact, it gave me a slight, I don't want to go too far in this direction, but a slight Halloween 3 type of thing, maybe. But like I said, I don't want to go too far in that direction. It was just like a little whiff of that. That's what it gave me. But yeah, so these two, you know, perfectly good examples of extreme horror. So if you're into that, then, you know, you could certainly do a lot worse, that's for sure. So that will do it for this Tomes of Terror. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. You know, if you enjoy the content, it really does help with the algorithm. And I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.